this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have I asked my HVAC guy I found on Angie.com to change my grandpa's trachea tube? Because I was so amazed by how quickly he replaced our air ducts. I knew I could trust him to change Pop-Pop's tube while I was on vacation.
Make it quick, young man.
Aw, see? Pop-Pop trusts you.
I think we should call a doctor.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, along with our house DJ Tolliver, who is back this week. And Tolliver, it turns out that the $1 billion that Congress just rescinded from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting did, let me see here, absolutely nothing to reduce the national debt.
You had to check your notes for that one, huh?
I did, yes. But
I've never heard of the debt going down. Is anyone here?
It could happen. It is something that is technically possible, but it turns out the debt is increasing by almost $4 billion per day in this country. That is in part because of all the interest we're paying on the $36 trillion in total debt right now, and because we're adding to that debt by more than $1 trillion a year by not bringing in as much in taxes as we spend on everything from the military to Social Security. The last time, Tolliver, that the U.S. took in more than it spent was in the Clinton administration about 25 years ago, when there was a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, and a Republican Speaker of the House. The issue of dealing with the debt is incredibly political, with each side sticking to their party's priorities when it comes to what can be cut. So we're going to see this hour if there's a middle way. What can be done to fix the national debt is our question, and our number is 844-4MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353, or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. But first, last week on the show, we talked about whether or not social media is safe for kids and teenagers, and we heard from so many young people both during the show and afterwards in our voicemail.
My name is Andre from Baltimore, Maryland. I am 17, and I have experienced social media, and, you see other people's lives, but it's in this way that it's curated where you only see the good things. You don't see the bad parts of someone's life. And I think that's bad for these kids like me.
My name is Sidru. I am 17 years old. I'm calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Not to be really difficult, but the best solution here is a wider cultural shift, a wider cultural understanding that all of us are having this problem. It's not just teenagers. It's not just adults.
Hey, this is Mitch from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm a younger person. It is a little crazy to see how, really addicted it just seems people are. And I know even myself, I personally use Instagram, and I definitely get sucked into it. I have no clue why we do it, probably just because we struggle with self-control, but it's definitely a problem.
Can you think any other show, Tolliver, where you hear from multiple teenagers in the hour?
Not one, man.
And
Not
thanks to
one.
everyone who called in. You can hear that entire episode on our podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. So now to our question this hour. How can we fix the national debt? Tolliver, how can people reach us?
Yeah, you can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. You can also comment on our live stream on YouTube. You can hit us up everywhere, and I'm going to see it, okay? So put your comments in. I'll get you on air.
Joining me this hour, CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman. Steve, welcome back.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
And Stephanie Kelton is with us, professor of economics and public policy at Stony Brook University. Her book is called The Deficit Myth, Modern Monetary Theory and the Birth of the People's Economy. Stephanie, welcome to you.
Thank you. Nice to be with all of you.
It's great to have you. So before we get to the phones, I spent many years covering business and economic news during and after the financial crisis of 2008. And there were economists, Steve, who were worried about how much the U.S. was borrowing to stimulate the economy. But there were also people who said it doesn't matter right now. The debt did not. We can have this debt. It seems like the conversation is kind of different now, Steve, maybe because interest rates are higher or the debt is bigger. But what do the people you talk to say about this as a problem?
Well, let me ask you, Jeremy, when were you doing that reporting?
Like 2008 through like 2013.
So doesn't it seem quaint now, the numbers they were talking about?
Right.
And I think that's well, first of all, I have to say one thing before we get going, which is whatever budget cuts you have to go through, Jeremy, don't let Tolliver go because the tunes are grooving and fantastic.
Right, exactly.
Hey,
I would
just
want to spend a minute to say that. But,
checks in the mail, Stephen.
Yeah,
Checks in the mail.
none necessary. Just keep spinning. But here's the deal. It is true, and it's important to point out that the debt has been a source of catastrophic prediction for many years. And those folks have been wrong, right? We have had the ability to borrow more and more and pay our debt much beyond the capacity of what people have said. The truth is, nobody knows what the actual limit is of our debt to GDP, which is now approaching 100% and going to 120%, they say. By way of comparison, you can look back, you can look at Japan right now, which has a 200% debt to GDP ratio. You can look back to the 1700s and Britain, which fought many, many wars and had a 200 and 250% debt to GDP ratio. It grew its way out of it through the Industrial Revolution, technology and productivity and budget austerity. We don't know, but I would like to sort of quote Robert Rubin, who said to, when I made these arguments to him, he said, okay, do you really want to find out where that limit is? And I don't think I want to find out. And I don't know where that limit is. And I know that there's been a lot of, what's the word, catastrophizing of the debt to GDP. And it has been wrong. I think Stephanie is chomping at the bit, has something to say about that. But just before I let her have it, have the microphone, I would just point out that over time, what's unusual and worrisome to me about the debt to GDP right now is it's rising at a time of peacetime and of expansion.
Yeah, right.
And that's the thing that is most concerning. And so when it comes time to need to help people and to boost aggregate demand in a recession, I have concerns that the resources may not be there. So
yeah, I was taught in college economics that in good times you save and then you can spend in the bad times. Let me let Stephanie in here. And Stephanie, what do you think? Does a $36 trillion national debt need to be dealt with?
Well, no. I mean, look, I'll throw out an example, and I'm only partly kidding, and actually I'm not really kidding. I drive a Ford Mach-E. Okay, I bought it a few years ago. I took advantage of a provision in the CARES Act that kicked in a little bit of money if people would go out and buy an electric vehicle. So I did that. So the way I think about this is it would be sort of like me taking my Mach-E into my mechanic tomorrow morning and saying, I want you to take a look at the engine and see if you can fix it. Okay, that would be a really silly thing to do. There is no engine in my car, so there's nothing to fix. And I feel a lot like that's what this conversation is. When people say to me, what are your ideas for how we should go about, tackling or fixing the national debt? I say, well, what is the evidence that there's a problem that we need to resolve? And the fact that it's a very large number is not in itself evidence of a problem. I know it makes people very nervous when you put lots of zeros behind a number and you attach the word debt to it. Okay, that automatically gets people concerned. But what I'm looking at when I hear this word, I try not to focus and fixate on the word debt. I prefer to try to put this into context. What are we actually talking about? We're talking about the number of dollars that the federal government has spent into our hands over the entire course of U.S. history and not taxed away from us. Those dollars are being held in the form of Treasury securities. They're part of our savings and part of our wealth. So you look at this number and you say, well, I don't know, is 36 trillion too much wealth for people to have? Is it too much saving? Can it create problems? Yes. And where I would look for problems would be in something like inflation. But when somebody says, why are we running these large deficits? The economy's doing really well, unemployment is low, inflation's coming back down. I say, exactly. What problem are you pointing to, right? Where is the evidence that, go ahead.
Stephanie, did you see a connection between the spending in during COVID and inflation? Like, is there a connection between the amount of debt that was racked up and the inflation that we saw in the last few years?
Yes, and you used an important word, which was connection. So we could use another word that maybe has a similar meaning, which would be correlation. Yes, there's a correlation. Would be more interesting if we have a conversation about causation. Did the amount of money that was spent, was it largely responsible for? Did it cause the highest inflation that we've had in some 40 years? Now, people, can have reasonable disagreements about the extent to which the various pieces of legislation contributed to inflationary pressures. And I'm certainly not here to say that they played no role. But I think whether you're looking at, work coming out of Moody's or Goldman Sachs or the Federal Reserve or the IMF, people who've taken a hard look at this and sort of done the autopsy, right, to say how much of the inflation that we experienced came from an excess of fiscal support. The answer from economists, very well-known economists, former central banker, Ben Bernanke, Olivier Blanchard, they'll say it played some role, but it was a minor role. Overwhelmingly, it was problems related to COVID, supply chain breakdowns, the war in Russia and Ukraine, and that sort of stuff, energy, food prices, and the like.
Let me just bring Steve in for 1 minute here before we have to take a quick break, which is there are many people who would disagree with some of what Stephanie has been saying. There's a study from Ernst & Young that I read that says that rising debt will lower income, reduce investment, eliminate millions of jobs, and reduce GDP. What is the argument that says we can't just allow the debt to continue to increase? Steve.
So there's a couple arguments that I think are worth talking about. 1 second, I'm just going to plug my computer in, but because the battery is dying. But sorry about that. But anyway.
Actually, you know what, Steve? We're going to let you do that. We're going to let you do that because we have to take a break in a second anyway. And I will just remind our listeners that you can reach us at 84. This is the first time that's ever happened. 844 middle.
The battery went bad.
844-464-3353. Tolliver. Florida's Republican Senator Rick Scott would be considered a deficit hawk. He says the so-called big, beautiful bill that just passed that they said will add to the deficit didn't go far enough in cutting spending.
Yeah, and he often cites his lower middle class upbringing in central Illinois, your home country, as an inspiration for his fiscal conservatism. Here he is talking about the deficit in an interview with CNBC.
Let's get some fiscal sanity here. We're not going to get inflation down. We're not going to get interest rates down unless we get spending at the level of what we bring in. The public has told us what they're going to give us in revenues. We have to live within our means. You do. Businesses do. I balanced our budget when I was governor of Florida, even though it had not been balanced in 20 years. I paid off a third of state debt because we went line by line. We got rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, and things that might be nice to have, but we can't afford it.
And as we said, Rick Scott voted for the big, beautiful bill, which adds to the debt. He's also from Florida, Tolliver. We're doing a very special episode of One Thing Trump Did that's dropping in a few days. That's going to be looking at how Florida's political machine is affecting the whole country right now with all these Floridians in very high positions of our government. That's going to be a must listen to on The Middle podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with more of The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have I asked my HVAC guy I found on Angie.com to change my grandpa's trachea tube? Because I was so amazed by how quickly he replaced our air ducts. I knew I could trust him to change Pop-Pop's tube while I was on vacation.
Make it quick, young man.
Aw, see? Pop-Pop trusts you.
I think we should call a doctor.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We are focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking what can be done to fix the national debt. Tolliver, what is the number to call in?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media. The comments are flying in, so get in that queue.
And the calls are coming in. We're going to get to them in just a second. I am joined by CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman and Stephanie Kelton, a professor at Stony Brook University. Steve, back to you. So we were talking about some of the downsides that experts warn about an increasing debt.
So I think you got to separate the problems. There's economic issues related to it, and there are political issues. The economic ones are very related, by the way, to confidence. The whole thing is a massive confidence game, right? $36 trillion of debt means there's $36 trillion of paper floating out there that people are holding that they believe the U.S. government will pay off. And that creates issues every time the government has a rollover or debt becomes due or has to get more money. It has to go out and sell those bonds to the market. And the question becomes not really whether they sell them. That's a separate issue we can discuss, which would talk about an auction failure. Has it happened? Probably won't happen. But what is the price that we have to pay for that? And that's really the issue, the price that the government has to pay. And then it becomes a political issue, which is how much money now is being allocated through taxes to paying the debt. And it has now become a massive part of the budget. I believe it's bigger than defense and bigger than education. And the question is, politically, what kind of government, what kind of expenditures do you want to have? Stephanie's right. It goes into the pockets of people, but which people does it go into? And politically, does it create choices where, for example, Medicare has to be cut so that we can reduce the amount of the deficit and spend more for paying the debt service? So you have this confidence issue, an economic issue, along with serious political issues. Just real quick, Jeremy, let me tell you what the United States is. The United States is a person that makes $100,000 a year, has $100,000 of debt, and has $500,000 in the bank. Our debt to asset ratio is 5 to 1. We're fine. We're fine. It's not a question of do we have the money to pay. The question is, do we have the political will to pay? And that's why we were downgraded, most recently, I believe, by Moody's.
They're always so fast on that, Moody's. Let's go to Nathan, who is in Boulder, Colorado. Nathan, welcome to the middle. What do you think about this?
Hi, my name is CK Mason. I think that we need to redefine what national defense means, because that's one of our core issues, is through keeping a very vague answer of what national defense means that allows us to keep going imperialistically and keep defending other nations, other things that ultimately does not turn back into good debt for us. I also think that we need to roll Social Security and Medicare into state budgets, and the states are now accountable for this so that we don't have to lose money sending money to D.C. to back in processing fee and employment fees.
Interesting. Nathan, thanks for that call. Stephanie, he brings up Social Security and Medicare, two very big parts of our spending. The last time Social Security was touched was in the early 80s. Is it time to think about raising the age or means testing it in order to, because national debt aside, they're going to run out of money, according to the experts, in like 10 years, and so they're not going to have enough to pay it out fully. Would you touch that as an economist?
No, I wouldn't. Look, when it comes to Social Security, I look at this and I focus on three things. Okay, the Alan Greenspan. You said the last time it was touched, 1983. It was known as the Greenspan Commission. Alan Greenspan, when he was Fed chair, testified before Congress, and at the time, then Congressman Paul Ryan, asked Alan Greenspan this question that you're basically asking, which is, what do we do about the fact that Social Security is running out of money? Shouldn't we begin to privatize the system, move to personal retirement accounts? And Alan Greenspan said, absolutely not. He said, and these are his exact words, okay? He said, there's nothing to prevent the federal government from creating as much money as it wants and paying it to someone. Those are his words. He said, the question is, though, how do you set up a system that assures that the real assets are created, that those benefits are employed to purchase? In other words, Greenspan was trying to get us to think about inflation. He's saying, we've made all these promises to future retirees, their dependents, the disabled. There's no problem making those payments. We can make the payments in full, on time, in perpetuity. But he said, we got demographic changes taking place. How do we know that when those checks go out, people who receive them are going to be able to turn around and spend them back into an economy that is productive enough, that's producing enough goods and services to meet the needs of everybody who's trying to spend without causing an inflation problem? So this is not about ability to pay. It is not about financial ability to pay. It cannot be. It's about political will, which is what Steve was just talking about, willingness, the political will to make good. There is no economic reason at all to touch Social Security.
Okay, let's go to Joe, who's in Herndon, Virginia. Joe, welcome to the middle. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I want to echo Steve's earlier comment. Love the tunes, Tolliver. Keep those going.
Big show for me.
My question, sorry, what was that?
He said it was a big show for him.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So my question is kind of a first principles question. I'm curious what you all think, how much money should exist and are underfunded or underaddressed societal problem sets indicators of an insufficient money supply?
So you're asking, should the Fed be printing more money to make ends meet, basically? Steve, what do you think about that?
If we've decided, or if we've come up with a tax structure that isn't addressing things like Social Security or climate change or I mean, we could chalk it up to political will, but if we've, sent people for 25 years and we keep coming up with deficits in a big way, is that not an indicator that maybe our system doesn't have enough money flowing through it? Or how do y'all think about that?
Interesting. Thank you for that call, Steve.
I think Stephanie has added a great deal to the economic discussion in her ideas about how government spending that inflation is one of the limitations on government spending. And you can tell that you're spending too much through the inflation numbers. I think that's important, and an important way to think about it. There's another way to think about it, which I also like, and Stephanie mentioned Olivia Blanchard, one of the leading minds in economics today. And basically, it's that the return on the investment is greater than the cost of investment. And so what you want to end up doing is bringing interest rates down to a point where the thing you invest in is returning greater than the interest rate you're paying. And it's kind of the problem we have right now, is that we do need to bring interest rates down. And part of that can come through government spending. It can come through an increase in revenue, which is talk about being on the show The Middle. I'm decidedly in the middle on this notion of needing to reduce government spending. Somebody mentioned defense before. That's a great target, but also raising revenue. I don't know. I blew a gasket in the back of my head earlier this week when they raised, for example, the cap on the estate tax from 15 million or up to 15 million. This has been, by the way, Jeremy, the ace in the hole of government finances is this massive transference of wealth that's happening between the baby boom generation and the next generation. Mm-hmm. The government's going to get a piece of that. Well, the Congress just decided it wanted less of a piece of that than it otherwise was going to get. So that to me I think that's a $200 billion hit to revenue. Yeah. And all these other things that were done. The CBO this week had 3.4 trillion additional deficit spending on the big beautiful bill. The question becomes: is the investment returning? You can make a discussion about climate change. You can make a discussion about the IRA, but that's really the key to the growth. I think Stephanie talked about that earlier in terms of productivity.
Paul is calling from Smyrna, Tennessee. Paul, your thoughts on bringing down the debt? Paul, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to see all these clowns in Washington take a pay cut. Throughout my lifetime, and I'm sure over the 200 years or more that the country's been in existence, when businesses get in trouble, they either cut salaries or lay people off. And frankly, I'm a little tired of some congressman or some senator standing up and saying, hey, we need to cut this or cut that, when these jokers never take a cut. Never. Do their pensions go into the something government fund, and they write you back and say, oh, that pension no longer exists? No, they just vote themselves some more money.
And do you think so angry that they're not taking a pay cut themselves? Are you worried about the amount of debt that's being racked up, Paul?
Pardon me?
Are you worried about the amount of debt that's being racked up for all of us as a country?
Oh, sure. When they start talking about $3 trillion in debt, I can't even imagine $1 trillion, much less 3. And this is from people that for years told us, oh, we need to cut. We need to cut.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you very much for that call. And Stephanie, I have to say, as somebody who has worked in public broadcasting for my career, and in the last week, Congress cut the $1 billion for 2 years of funding that they give to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I can totally hear what Paul is saying about, well, we got to cut this to deal with it, but not any of these other things.
Well, yeah, I mean, nobody's going to be surprised to learn that there's a lot of hypocrisy in Washington, D.C. I mean, we've listened for years and years. That's largely the premise of this program, is listening to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle point the finger at one another and cry and complain about things that add to the deficit and increase the size of the debt. Nobody likes it, but everybody does it. And so, you point your finger at the Democrats and say, this is your fault. It's all spending run amok. And the Democrats point the finger at the Republicans and say, no, it's not a spending problem. It's a revenue problem. You keep giving away all the money in the form of tax cuts and so forth. So, yeah, it's not a very sincere conversation in many respects. That said, cutting programs like NPR, PBS, cutting a few federal salaries doesn't make a dent in the size of the deficit. It's a rounding error at the end
Tolliver,
of the day.
the man of the hour, what's coming in online?
It's my show now. This is Jennifer in DeKalb. She says, to say that the debt is not an issue because of its size is ridiculous. All of the tax dollars that are going to pay interest could instead be paying for services and benefits for the American people. Deborah says, if a national immigration system was put in place that actually worked, all of those revenues collected from that could solve our national debt crisis. I'm not sure what that means. Kathleen in St. Paul, Minnesota says, Trump has recently stated that the tariffs have brought in $88 billion in the last 2 months. Is this money going towards paying off the debt? And I feel like that's something we can get into. Steve,
that is absolutely, Steve.
Yeah.
You know, wait a minute. Let me just give you a number here. The Tax Foundation, which is a nonpartisan organization, says a 10% universal tariff could bring in $2 trillion over a decade. Are we expecting these tariffs to start, actually having an impact on money coming in?
Yes, over the short term, and probably no over the long term. Look, this was one of the biggest tax hikes, I think, since the early 1960s. And it's just remarkable to me that it's not been kind of explained as that. These are basically American corporations and American consumers paying this money out there, and it is going into the federal coffers. The trouble is that over time, this number will probably be reduced because people will either live without or buy domestically, one or the other. There'll be a kick on the other side of domestically. But you also will have a reduction in GDP because of this, because frankly, it's the least efficient way probably for companies and other people to buy the things that they need in a more expensive way, either to buy domestically or for companies especially that use imports as inputs into their production. It's going to be a higher cost, and it will reduce productivity over time. So yeah, we're going to get a nice boost to the revenue side. But it's going to decline over time and bring down GDP with it because it's a less efficient structuring of the global trade system.
People will go looking for the cheaper prices where they can get them over the course of time.
Yeah, sure, but they may end up doing it in the United States, which will be. And the other thing is you may do without it, right? I mean, that's another thing. You may end up saying, I didn't need that, and so I won't get it. What really strikes me as significant is what it does to U.S. Innovation, in that we have been able to innovate through a global supply chain. Think about Apple. Apple is a virtual manufacturing company. It doesn't manufacture anything. Everything it does, all the manufacturing it outsources elsewhere. Okay, so bring it back home. Now ask yourself, does Apple exist if all the production is domestic? What happens to the price of an iPhone? Does the iPhone become the ubiquitous tool that it is right now? If Apple had to make it all domestically. And I think about this one woman who I read about in a New York Times story who's trying to create a solid state battery. She's a Chinese immigrant, educated in the United States, became an American citizen, raised money from Mercedes in Germany, and is making the prototypes in South Korea. That's what's happening. That's the way the world works. That's how we innovate.
Let's get to Marilyn in Birmingham, Alabama. Marilyn, welcome to the middle. Your thoughts on the debt?
Well, I'd just like to say the debt was actually paid. It was zero during the Clinton administration. Bill Clinton balanced the budget. He's the only president in my lifetime, and I'm 73 years old, to ever balance the budget. When George W. Bush came in, he ran it up $2 trillion right away. So my experience is the Democrats pay the bills and the Republicans run them up.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you, Marilyn. And you're talking about the deficit, which is the annual sort of imbalance between how much we're bringing in and how much we're spending. That was balanced back in, I think, 2000 under Bill Clinton. But Stephanie, your thoughts on Marilyn's comments there?
Well, look, I have a lot of sympathy because, it does sound like the kind of story that one would, want to wave around and wear as a sort of badge of honor as a Democrat and say, look, we are the fiscally responsible party. We're the last guys who eliminated the deficit and put the budget in surplus. And this happened for 4 years. It started in 1998. We had budget surpluses from 98 until 2001. And she's quite right that when George W. Bush came in, the surpluses were gone and we were back to deficits. But the part of the story that got left out, and most people just don't know, is that those Clinton surpluses were always going to be unsustainable. Because think about what a government surplus means. It means the government is taking more money out of our hands every year than it's putting back in. You can do that for a period of time, but at some point, you push the rest of us. It was the U.S. private sector that was running deficits in that period. The economy went into recession in 2001 as a result, and the Bush tax cuts were, you know, maybe not everybody's favorite way of addressing the recession and the slowdown, but it was the right move, at least directionally.
Well, and I remember Bush saying, it's not the government's money, it's your money. Tolliver, do you have any tape to play for us that has something to do with this?
You know what I do. Here's former President Bill Clinton outlining his plan back in 1999.
Fiscal discipline has widened opportunity and created hope for all working people in our country. Now we have a chance to do even more, to use the fruits of our prosperity today to strengthen our prospects for tomorrow, indeed for tomorrow's well into the 21st century. By 2015, this country can be entirely out of debt.
Spoiler alert, Tolliver, that did not happen in 2015.
And then he ripped into a big sax solo right after that.
That's right. That's right. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have I asked my HVAC guy I found on Angie.com to change my grandpa's trachea tube? Because I was so amazed by how quickly he replaced our air ducts. I knew I could trust him to change Pop-Pop's tube while I was on vacation.
Make it quick, young man.
Aw, see? Pop-Pop trusts you.
I think we should call a doctor.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour we're asking what should be done about the national debt, if anything. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also reach out at listentothemiddle.com. I'm joined by Stephanie Kelton, a professor of economics and public policy at Stony Brook University, and CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman. Steve, before we go back to the phones, one way that it seems economists on both sides agree you can increase tax revenues is to actually have enough people working for the IRS to collect them, make sure that they're crossing all the T's and dotting the I's. The IRS workforce is down by a quarter since January, and the big, beautiful bill cuts the numbers even further. Why does Trump want to cut the IRS, and Republicans, why do they want to cut the IRS by so much when it means that there will be less revenue coming in?
You know, I think some of it has to do with a sense of the IRS being unfair to Republicans during the Biden administration. I think that was some of it. So they're kind of on the MAGA hit list. That's one thing. Look, I think they want to maybe ultimately dismantle the structure of the federal government the way it exists. And I mean, some of this dates back, Jeremy, to the 30s and the establishment of some of the welfare system created by FDR when it came to Social Security and other things. And I think they want to stop the ability of the government to raise that revenue. If you want to raise revenue and you care about that stuff, you would not do what they're doing relative to IRS employment. I think that's, what they talk about when they talk about how to solve the deficit from a revenue problem, they talk about broaden the base and collecting the taxes that aren't paid. And that's a considerable number.
Yeah. Mike is calling from Denver, Colorado. Mike, welcome to The Middle. What do you think should be done about the debt, or what are your thoughts?
Hi. Mike from Denver, Colorado. Thanks for taking my call. Also, I'm going to add a song to your song list, The Day the Dollar Dies by Peter Tosh, which is a good money song. But I'm really... but I wanted to ask, and I'm delighted to be able to ask a question of Stephanie Kelton and your other expert. But if what we say is the deficit is all the money that's out in the system. It's in people's pockets. It's in the pockets of every American in the country. The problem isn't the money not going into the pockets of people who are going to respend it and reinvest it in the economy. It's going into the pockets of the wealthy and corporations who are going to use buyback stocks to increase the value of their stock, or they're going to park their money in an offshore account somewhere. So the money's not being reinvested in our country, and therefore it can't be taxed, and therefore the deficit goes up and up and up because the wrong people have the money in their pockets and they aren't reinvesting it in the economy.
Stephanie, that's to you.
It's such a good and important point. So let me say two things. First, a reminder. Every deficit is good for someone. The deficit, the thing we call the government deficit, is just the difference between two numbers. The first number is outlays, how many dollars the government pushes out into the economy every year. For simple numbers, let's call it $7 trillion right now. The other number is how many they take back out, mostly in the form of taxation. Call that $5 trillion. If they put 7 in and take 5 out, what they're really doing is depositing to somewhere. And this gets to the really important point. Every deficit is good for someone. The question is for whom and for what? Are those deficits helping us to address real problems in the economy? Are we getting better health care, education, infrastructure, defense, whatever it is? Or, as the caller just alluded to, is that money pooling up in the hands of a relatively small population of people who don't recirculate it through the economic system so that it runs through the veins of commerce and helps to support jobs and economic activity more broadly? So it's important. Every deficit's good for someone, but not all deficits are created equal. It's a really important point.
Ryan is calling from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ryan, go ahead with your thoughts.
Hey, thanks for taking my call tonight. I was hoping your two commentators might be able to offer some insight into, has there been in the past efforts to pass a balanced budget amendment? And more recently, is there anyone who is trying to take this up? And if so, what would the feasibility be of getting this through? Or is this something that actually people in both parties would prefer not to actually happen? Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, Steve, it's interesting because even if you believe that the deficit or the debt is not a problem, the idea of passing an amendment that says we've got to have a balanced budget, that we bring in what we spend, could still be the case. You could still want to do that.
No, you wouldn't. But Congress keeps trying to be like Odysseus, right? And tying itself to the mast so it won't be tempted by the sound of the of the sirens. And every time the sirens sing, they untie the rope. They passed all kinds of things. There was pay-go and all sorts of things. But let me try to go to the 30,000 foot level on debt, just real quickly, which is debt is not bad. There's a wonderful book written called Financing the American Dream, which is actually the history of debt in America. And what this book tells us is that we have had a history in this country of thinking that debt is very, very bad morally while we borrow extensively. And it's part of our whole kind of religious conflict with our capitalist system, which is deeply ingrained in the contradiction of America. But first of all, we want a large debt market. The world wants and requires a large U.S. debt market. It is the grease that lubricates the world. We benefit enormously and inordinately from this large debt market. We have foreigners buying our debt. They desperately want our dollars so they can buy our debt, and they sell us stuff. And we could get into the whole trade thing if you like, but that's a real reason for the massive trade deficit, is that people want our dollars in part so they can buy our assets, because they love our assets, because they love our debts, our debt, and they buy it and they keep interest rates down. And ultimately, we do not want to get rid of our debt. We'd like to control our debt. It would not take very much, Jeremy, in my opinion, for the U.S. government to say, we have a plan over a 10 or 20 year period to control our finances. And this could bring down interest rates, I don't know what, maybe 50 basis points or half a percentage point, or maybe a percentage point, if the United States showed it had some responsibility for the debt. That's just the problem. The problem I think Stephanie laid out earlier is every party comes in and says, they preach their austerity and they act and spend like mostly drunken sailors. But
I guess the other problem, Steve, with having a 10 or 15 year plan is that the president is only in there for 4 years. So then the next one could come in and completely change the plan. We do have a full roster of calls here, so let me get to another one, and let's go to Sean in San Mateo, California. Hi, Sean. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. So I want to touch on something that was just mentioned, actually, right before I got on, which is that I don't think the debt is a problem. It's the deficit, and it's the debt service payment as a share of GDP. And what I mean when I say that is I think there is a runaway point where if our foreign debtors don't believe that we can realistically pay it back, or that we're less reliable. We've seen recently the risk premium go up on long-term treasuries.
On bonds, yeah.
So, yes. And that actually is a vicious cycle, because that means our debt service payments just keep growing as a result of that, which means it crowds out public investments that we could make in the public sector and private sector. And then we get slower economic growth as a result of that. And it's a runaway train where our economic growth never catches up to our debt service growth. And one more point I would put on this is that I don't think there's ever been a moment in time where we've actually grown our way toward a smaller deficit. I mean, we ran up all in all close to $8 trillion during COVID. And that added to the deficit, and we're not going to have that kind of GDP growth going forward because of our shrinking labor force. So we're never going to grow like we did the past couple of years, is my point. And so I don't see us growing out of this. I think we just need to take some reasonable steps to show bondholders that we're going to keep this in check. And it won't get out of control. I think that's
a lot there, Sean. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Let's just talk about the fact what he brings up, which is true, is that the premium on the debt, the yield on the Treasury bonds has been going up. It's higher than it was a few years ago. We're spending more money to have this debt. Is that a problem?
Well, it depends what you mean by a problem. If what you mean is, and he sort of started with this, was to say something about whether we can pay it. It isn't about whether we can pay. There's a willingness to pay argument when the ratings agencies take a look at U.S. debt and they, grade the U.S. Sovereign risk. they are usually careful to say we're talking not about the country's ability to pay, but we have concerns about willingness to pay. Sometimes we play around with the debt ceiling limit, we threaten to default or something like that. So separate the two, the willing to pay versus the ability to pay. But it isn't the case that because interest becomes a very large percentage of the federal budget, that somehow the government isn't going to be able to afford to make investments in other parts of the economy. This is exactly the same argument we heard in 2017 when the Republicans passed the tax cuts that were called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. There were a lot of economists on the left, Democrats, people who served in Democratic administrations, who said if the Republicans are successful and they push these tax cuts through, one very well-known economist said, I'll tell you exactly what he said. He said the United States of America will be living on a shoestring for decades to come because of the increases in the deficits. Okay, that was Larry Summers. Another one that Steve referred to earlier is Jack Lew. Jack Lew said if we get into some kind of military conflict, if we have an economic downturn, some other kind of financial crisis, the money won't be there because the Republicans spend it all on tax cuts. Boy, was that wrong. How do we know it was wrong? Because COVID happened. And when COVID happened, there was the crisis. And what did we do? Congress put the legislation together, the votes were there, and trillions of dollars went out the door. So again, if you don't like the fact that you're spending more on interest than you're spending on defense, there's always the option to spend more on defense. We could also explore maybe ways to spend less on interest over time. But these are political decisions. They're not economic constraints. They're not financial constraints on the federal government.
Right. Fazio is joining us from Minneapolis. Fazio, welcome to The Middle. Your thoughts?
Hi. I've been a big fan of Professor Kelton ever since seeing her TED Talk. So, which triggered my amateur self-study of macroeconomics, starting with your book. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
I have an answer. I have an answer and a question, if you don't mind. I'll try to be quick. First, the best story I use when asked about the size of the debt is that I hate to admit that I am old enough to remember the Reagan tax cuts that pushed the national debt past the milestone $1 trillion in 1982. There was a large outpouring of concern and commentary expressed in the media with such metaphorical weeping and gnashing of teeth, rendering of garments over this milestone, and the millstones that we were hanging on our grandchildren. Well, we are now 37 times that amount and 2 generations removed. And I haven't seen any people wandering around with millstones or any financial or otherwise consequences from this. So, kind of use your own eyes, as they say. So, but my question now is, the U.S. has been running a chronic trade deficit for a long time. Warren Mosler and perhaps your other MMT colleagues claim that foreigners get the cash, but we get the goods, a net positive for us. Some others, such as Professor Steve Keen, claim, and as modeled in his system dynamics simulator, that long-term trade deficits are damaging to the economy. So I'm curious to hear Professor Kelton's position on chronic trade deficits. Should we be concerned?
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Fazio. And I'm going to actually, though, ask Steve Liesman to step in first, and then we'll go to Professor Kelton on that, since Steve's been off the air for at least a few minutes at this point.
Well, I don't want to take the ability of the caller to get an answer from Stephanie. I'll just say no. The answer is no. The trade deficit is just the other side of our current account surplus. We have massive dollar inflows from all around the world. America is astride of the global capitalist system. The president says the world is taking advantage of us. That's not really true. America really is the recipient of largesse from all over the world. And when they buy, they give us goods and we give them funny pieces of paper. I'll take that trade all day long.
Stephanie Kelton, what about the trade deficit?
Look, I think I'm mindful of time. I'm watching the clock. I'm largely going to agree with the way Steve just put it. That's how I opened the chapter on trade in my own book. But then I went much, much deeper. Trade is a thorny issue. There's a lot of nuance here. It isn't all good. It isn't all bad for either side of the trade party in these things. So can it lead to problems? Can offshoring lead to some job losses domestically? Sure. Are there things that we could do to respond to that domestically, to reemploy people in other ways? Of course there are. So even when there are problems associated with chronic trade deficits, there are policy responses that we didn't choose, that we should have chosen, that would have allowed us to reap even more of the benefits of trade.
Tolliver, just a comment or two from online.
Sure. Carolyn in Colorado Springs says, raise the income level limit for Social Security taxes to $750,000. Close tax loopholes and regulate and penalize overseas tax havens. And then Paul in Kansas City says, many conservatives are following President Trump's lead to call on the Fed to lower interest rates. How would that likely affect the national debt? We've sort of covered that one. Oh, and here's the one I wanted. Matthew.
Actually, wait. Okay. Let me just pick up on that for 1 second, because we do have Fed expert Steve Liesman here. Steve, there's been a lot of talk about whether Donald Trump is going to fire the Fed chairman Jerome Powell, who, by the way, he appointed in his first term. Do you expect that to happen, or do you expect Powell to submit to the pressure and lower interest rates while we have you here?
I do not expect him to do that, and I don't expect the president to fire Powell, at least not today. Earlier this week, the president was singing a different tune. We believe he was spoken to by cooler heads within the administration who told him to back off that. There was a meeting today at the construction site that the president has created an issue out of nothing. This idea of this renovation of this Fed building, which is really a nothing issue. It's a lot of money, but it's irrelevant to policy. And really, it's the president wanting the Fed to lower interest rates. But I do not expect the chair to knuckle under to the president here. He'll go down fighting on this one.
Just for people who haven't been paying attention, that the president is focused on the renovation cost at the Fed, because then if he could figure out a way to fire Jerome Powell for cause, he would be able to do that, but he can't just fire him for no reason. I want to thank my guests so much, CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman and Stephanie Kelton, professor of economics and public policy at Stony Brook University. You've been great. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
And don't forget, The Middle is available as a podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. And next week on The Middle, we'll be back here asking if crime is an issue where you live and what can be done to address it.
As always,
how can people get in touch with us?
You can call in at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com, where you can also sign up for our free weekly newsletter and support us with a tax-deductible contribution.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Annika Dessler, and Brandon Kondritz. Our technical director is Steve Mork. Thanks to our satellite radio listeners, our podcast audience, and the more than 400 public radio stations making it possible for people across the country to listen to The Middle, and our YouTube audience. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'll talk to you next week.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969, Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather. In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.